Hello, my friends, and welcome to class two. I'm very sorry that I can't be with you yet again. I was totally planning to, and HR put the kibosh on it, said I have to wait one more day, and that magical day will be tomorrow, which is Wednesday. So happy Tuesday. I heard yesterday went well. I heard you guys are a great group, and I really can't wait to meet you in person. So, I want to talk to you a little bit today about culture. Yesterday, we discussed, as per the syllabus, um, we did some introductions. I told you a little bit about me. Um, those who are you sheets, you're just going to hold on to them because those are going to be due. I'm going to show you when I'm in tomorrow how to post assignments on Blackboard so that who are you sheet will be coming due, where you tell me a little bit more about yourself. And if I just open that up quickly now, that also gives a lot of identity about culture. So I showed you pictures, I talked about weddings, I talked about things that were important, my relationships with my kids, my relationship with my husband. Um, and I need you to write down who you perceive yourself to be in various areas of your life. And I really want you to spend a few minutes on each of them, really thinking about who are the relationships in my life. Am I a brother, a son, a grandson, a nephew, a student? Like, where am I anchored? So I'm not just a daughter, I'm a mom. And I say it all the time when I help new parents, because I used to teach a lot of parenting classes for my church. Another hint about my culture, um, that I'm not just a mom. I'm role modeling every role I have in my life. I'm an aunt. I'm a mom. I'm a wife. I'm a neighbor. I'm a friend. I'm a sister. Um, I'm an employee. I'm a lifelong student. I'm a teacher. And when you really sit for a few minutes and think about all of those connections and write them down, that also tells me something about your culture. Then, specific cultural aspects like your religion or your faith, your ethnicity, the language that you speak at home, your nationality, etc. Nationality being the nation where your family is from. So I am predominantly Eastern European, mostly Ukrainian, and Sicilian. So it's that bottom boot of Italy, which you could probably tell from the curly hair, which you might not be able to tell on camera though. Um, I'm Catholic. Uh, I speak English at home, but I also speak Ukrainian. My ancestry is very important to me. I'm first generation born in this country on my mom's side. Um, and I'm first generation on either side to go to college and obtain a master's and then a doctorate. So I'm pretty proud of that. Um, that's all part of what's important in my cultural background. I like things like I told you yesterday, like crafting. Um, I love watching sports, but I'm terrible at playing sports because, again, another hint culturally, I wasn't allowed to play them growing up. My mother felt it was very unladylike for women to sweat. Um, and girls being young women, I wasn't supposed to sweat in front of boys. So I got to watch shows like Donnie and Marie and the Brady Bunch. I was extremely sheltered. And I was given a love of music at a very early age. And that really spurred a great deal of my identity in high school. I was the marching band geek, I was in concert band. I got a full scholarship to college based on music. Because I played some instruments that many other people don't know how to play, specifically the marimba, which is similar to a xylophone, except it's not made of metal. It's made of African rosewood. It's got a gorgeous sound. You play it with mallets that are covered in yarn, sometimes in rubber. Um, and I was really pretty adept at it. It's like it's also a percussion instrument like the piano because you have to strike it. Um, and did many good things music for me in my life. I dislike chores, like taking the dishes out of the dishwasher and folding the laundry, which again gives you another aspect of my culture. Um, because I have a dishwasher, right? I obviously, am the wife, the mom. It's evident that that's my role to do those things in my home. I'm not suggesting that that's my role because I'm a woman. Um, hopes for what I want to do in the future gave a little bit away of that yesterday. I have a husband who likes to make me happy and wants me to indulge in things like learning how to play the cello and riding a horse. Um, but I'd really like to have grandbabies. That's what I really want. And I'd love to continue doing this job until I can't lift my head off of a pillow. I don't have any dreams of retiring. Retirement to me seems like ending something that you don't want to do anymore. And I don't ever see myself not wanting to do this. So I'd like you to fill in this Who Are You sheet. You're going to submit that to me tomorrow when I show you how on Blackboard, because that will give me some ideas as to your culture. Um, But what is culture? Well, it refers to a large and diverse set of mostly intangible aspects of social life, things that you can't actually physically touch and say, "Oh, this is my culture." This yellow shirt, this represents my culture. Sometimes you can say that with costumes and outfits that you wear, but generally speaking, your culture is not tangible. It consists of values, beliefs, your systems of language, communication, the practices that you share with people in common and that you use to define yourselves as a collective group. So, in the macro sense, Catholicism. I am a practicing Catholic. I identify with other practicing Catholics. As a collective, we are a group of Catholics. Um, we celebrate Christmas, we celebrate Easter, we have traditions that are very deep and rich and meaningful, and all of that is the collective group. um how we identify with each other when we're in church, when we're at different religious events. And it's also part of my culture. It's how I identify as a person. My faith is extremely important to me. um Culture is one of the most important concepts because people realize that it plays a very crucial role in our social lives as well. It's important for shaping your relationships, for maintaining social order, for determining how we make sense of our world and our place in it, and in shaping our everyday actions and experiences in society. And it's composed of both material and non material things. I was raised to be, sadly, a little more materialistic than I probably should have been, because affluence was something that you showed, right? If we looked rich, then we must be rich. So people didn't know that the water was getting shut off at home, the electric was getting shut off at home. Um, you know, there was always eviction notices, but we sat in the front row of church and we all looked beautiful in our designer clothing and designer pocketbooks and beautiful shoes, um, because it was all about appearance. That was important in the culture that I was surrounded with in my family. Most of that has rubbed off as I have grown older. And it's taught me lots of, really valuable life lessons. So now I have surrounded myself with people that are much more culturally like me, just hardworking, good, try to be good, morally centered people who are just trying to understand others, do their best, raise a family, make a living, pay the bills, and never have anything shut off, hopefully. Um, they include things like values and beliefs, language, communication, and practices that are shared in common with a group of people. And that can be as small on the micro level as your family and on a macro level with your community at large. And when I say language, it doesn't necessarily have to be an actual different language, um, like Spanish or Russian or Chinese. It can just be things that you are familiar with. So my mother, when she arrived here when she was little, and they put her into school, she failed one of the entrance exams that they gave her, um, because there were questions on it like things about cups and saucers. They were very poor. They were immigrants. They were brand new to this country. My mother had no idea what a cup and saucer was. And so she was kind of at a disadvantage in taking the test. And my mother's incredibly bright, not a very good mom, but incredibly bright. And she scored poorly on the exam because it talked about things that people of wealth would have had. And she was not exposed to that culturally. So she didn't know what they were. Um, the non material aspects of culture, like the values, beliefs, language, communication, practices that are shared in common by a group of people. Expanding on these, culture is made up of our knowledge, common sense, assumptions, and expectations. It's also the rules, the norms, the laws, and the morals that govern society. The words we use, as well as how we speak and write them, and the symbols we use to express meaning, ideas, and concepts, like traffic signals and emojis, for example. Culture is also what we do and how we behave and perform, like in theater and dance. It encapsulates in how we walk, how we sit, how we carry our bodies, how we interact with others, how we behave, depending on the place, time, and audience, and how we express identities of race, class, gender, and sexuality. It's also the collective practices we participate in, like religious ceremonies, the celebration of secular holidays, sports events, rock concerts. Material culture is composed of the things that humans make and use. This aspect of culture includes buildings, technological gadgets, clothing, film, music, literature, art, and aspects of material culture are more referred to as cultural products. So, Nike, Adidas, um, the Beats headphones, those are material culture. Those are items of a material culture, but they're all part of our culture. Um, and I want to mention to you a very famous sociologist by the name of Emile Durkheim. He was a French sociologist, and he developed a theory rooted in both the material and non material aspects of culture. The values, beliefs, morals, communications, and practices that we share in common provide us with a shared sense of purpose and a valuable collective identity. He believed through his research that when people came together to participate in rituals, they reaffirm the culture they hold in common, and in doing so, strengthen the social ties that bind them together. Today, sociologists see this important social phenomenon happening not only in religious rituals and celebrations like weddings and the Indian festival of Holi, but also in secular ones like high school dances, proms, widely attended televised sporting events like the Super Bowl or March Madness. Um, and you can see that if you ever watch the History Channel or the National Geographic Channel, depending on where people go in the world, different things are of value. I remember once watching, I don't remember exactly where it was, but in Western Africa, there was a country in which the women, the more rings you had on your neck, the more beautiful you were considered, the more culturally relevant you were. and they started placing the rings as early as infancy. And as the neck stretched, because long necks were are considered gorgeous, um, in this country, and they can't ever take them off, because once you stretch out all those muscles, think about it like a rubber band that's been stretched too many times and it just doesn't snap back. Um, and we might look and go, "Ooh, that long-necked women, why is that attractive?" But they might look at us and say, "Oh, why all the tattoos? Why the earrings? Why the nail polish?" Um, it's all in what you think is attractive. If you go back to the ancient practice in China of foot binding, fascinating show, I think on Netflix on that. They used to have to break the women's toes and their heels and literally bend them over and bind them, because the smaller the foot, the more beautiful the woman was. Um, Even if that meant she had to be carried everywhere because she couldn't walk on the feet, because they weren't able to support her. But it was considered to be beautiful. It's since been outlawed in China because it's practice that was just horrible, incredibly painful, rotten to do to your body, and just not um, not something that you want to put your body through to be beautiful. But look at the things that we do that we consider beauty: um, Botox, plastic surgery, facelifts, tummy tucks, the things that women in this country and many men subject themselves to in order to be culturally relevant. So I want you to just kind of reflect on that for a second when we talk about culture, um, because many times we come to situations with our own bias. And what I mean by that is, when we're raised in whatever culture we are raised in, whatever community, group, family, neighborhood, that's our cultural background. That says a lot about who we are. And we tend to be very judgmental of others not in that background, because A, we don't understand them, and B, they don't understand us. But that's part of the problem with this world, right? Is we tend to be wasting so much time judging what others are and aren't doing, and not taking the time to value why they think those things are valuable. So I tell you all of this because in this course, we're going to examine many different cultures, um, and many different categories of things that are represented in culture: racism, sexism, ageism, ableism. And wherever you fit in that mold, you're not just one thing, and different things are important to you. And I want you to always be reflecting with an open mind and not thinking, "Ooh, I would never do that," or "Ooh, that's gross," or "Ooh, why does that happen?" But instead say, "Why does that happen? Why is that important to that person? Let me understand why that's important, so that it might not become important to me, but I at least have an understanding of why that's important to that person." Um, and I may never know what it feels like to be in the LGBTQ community, or I may never understand what it is to lose a job, pray God, because, I'm considered too old to do the job. And I may never understand what it's like to be a person of color any more than I understand what it's like to be a man. But that doesn't mean that I can't have empathy and be reflective and try to understand why those things are culturally important to whatever person I am in contact with. And that becomes important not just in our social circles in school, but in life and in work, because we have to work with so many different people and we have to be understanding of so many different people. And so it's important to judge, um, through a lens of reflection and kindness, and understanding, and what do I need to know that I don't? What is scaring me that is causing me to be judgmental instead of understanding? So, that being said, I want you to reflect for a minute while I talk to you for a couple minutes about sketchnoting. So, remember when mom, maybe dad, definitely your teacher would get really upset with you because you were doodling, you were doing circles or making pictures in your notebook instead of paying attention to the lecture and taking notes? Well, there's a whole science now behind what's called sketchnoting, which is a fancy word for doodling, for taking notes with pictures. And I'm going to show you one of mine just so that you understand what I'm talking about. So I was in a class where we were obviously a teacher's class. Um, and we had to talk about the things that we thought we taught well, and what our passions were, and how we saw ourselves. So I really wanted to see myself as like super teacher. I'm really good in teaching social studies and cultural literacy. I'm really passionate about educator development, mentoring teachers and pre service teachers, about curriculum integration. Like I just don't teach math, I try to weave it into social studies and science and language arts because everything blends together. Um, Collaboration, going across boundaries. I'm really good at technology. I love children's literature and incorporating it into all of my classes because there's so many topics you can talk about through children's literature that make them so much less pressurized. And of course, social justice. So I wrote those things down as she was talking. I drew myself, I'm sorry, I'm a little spatially depth challenged when it comes to centering things in a camera, um, in a mirror image. I drew myself, you know, thinner and cute. And of course, wearing a cape and a superhero outfit because it's super teacher. So I want you to take a few minutes, break out those coloring pencils or the crayons that I asked you to bring yesterday in the email. If you don't have anything, a notebook, paper, and a pencil. Um, maybe turn on some quiet music in your headphones, or maybe Miss Sanders has some quiet music she could play off your phone for you. And take the next 10 or 15 minutes. Think about um, that who are you sheet, which again was sent in your email. So you can access it there as well. And start to sketch who you are. You do not have to be a fantastic artist. I'm not looking for fantastic artists. I'm just looking for you. And you can think about those things. You can add all of them, some of them. If there's things I missed that you want to talk to me about, go ahead and start to doodle that on a piece of paper. Miss Sanders, at this point, please pause. Give them, 10 to 15 minutes to do that. And then come back to me and we will proceed with the slides. Okay, so you're going to hold on to those sketch notes that you just spent the last 10 or 15 minutes working on. Put in as much artistry or as little artistry as you want or are able to, and don't worry about what it looks like. I'm just so excited to see it with you. So now I want you to kind of take everything we've talked about so far about culture and all of the different things that comprise culture, and material culture, and your family and your neighborhood and your nationality and your language and all of that. And I want you to take a few minutes to listen to the brilliant Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She is one of my favorite people to listen to, and I've read all of her books on the danger of the single story. And I really want you to pay attention because it's fascinating stuff. It's only about, I think it's 18 or 19 minutes. And then we're going to, I want you to talk about and think about what it is you saw in the video.
Grammarly helps you work more efficiently, which makes accomplishing your
Sorry
work
for the
goals
commercials.
easier.
No way to avoid
Get
them.
full.
I'm a storyteller, and I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I grew up on a university campus in eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I started reading at the age of 2, although I think 4 is probably close to the truth. So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer. And when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read, I wrote exactly the kinds of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue eyed. They played in the snow, they ate apples, and they talked a lot about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now, this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria, I had never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow, we ate mangoes, and we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books. But because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamara Laye, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination, they opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So, what the discovery of African writers did for me was this: it saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle class Nigerian family. My father was a professor, my mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, live-in domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US, whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia. But I did come to embrace this new identity, and in many ways, I think of myself now as African. Although I still get quite irritable when Africa is referred to as a country, the most recent example being my otherwise wonderful flight from Lagos 2 days ago, in which there was an announcement on the Virgin flight about the charity walk in India, Africa, and other countries. So after I had spent some years in the US as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. I would see Africans in the same way that I, as a child, had seen Fide's family. This single story of Africa ultimately comes, I think, from Western literature. Now, here's a quote from the writing of a London merchant called John Locke, who sailed to West Africa in 1561 and kept a fascinating account of his voyage. After referring to the Black Africans as beasts who have no houses, he writes, "They are also people without heads, having their mouths and eyes in their breasts." Now, I've laughed every time I've read this, and one must admire the imagination of John Locke. But what is important about his writing is that it represents the beginning of a tradition of telling African stories in the West, a tradition of sub-Saharan Africa as a place of negatives, of difference, of darkness, of people who, in the words of the wonderful poet Rudyard Kipling, are half devil, half child. And so I began to realize that my American roommate must have, throughout her life, seen and heard different versions of this single story. As had a professor who once told me that my novel was not authentically African. Now, I was quite willing to contend that there were a number of things wrong with the novel, that it had failed in a number of places, but I had not quite imagined that it had failed at achieving something called African authenticity. In fact, I did not know what African authenticity was. The professor told me that my characters were too much like him, an educated and middle class man. My characters drove cars. They were not starving. Therefore, they were not authentically African. But I must quickly add that I too am just as guilty on the question of the single story. A few years ago, I visited Mexico from the US. The political climate in the US at the time was tense, and there were debates going on about immigration. And as often happens in America, immigration became synonymous with Mexicans. There were endless stories of Mexicans as people who were fleecing the healthcare system, sneaking across the border, being arrested at the border, that sort of thing. I remember walking around on my first day in Guadalajara, watching the people going to work, rolling up tortillas in the marketplace, smoking, laughing. I remember first feeling slight surprise, and then I was overwhelmed with shame. I realized that I had been so immersed in the media coverage of Mexicans that they had become one thing in my mind: the abject immigrant. I had bought into the single story of Mexicans, and I could not have been more ashamed of myself. So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. It is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. There is a word, an Igbo word, that I think about whenever I think about the power structures of the world, and it is nkale. It's a noun that loosely translates to be greater than another. Like our economic and political worlds, stories too are defined by the principle of nkale. How they are told, who tells them, when they are told, how many stories are told, are really dependent on power. Power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. The Palestinian poet Mourid Barghouti writes that if you want to dispossess a people, the simplest way to do it is to tell their story and to start with secondly. Start the story with the arrows of the Native Americans and not with the arrival of the British, and you have an entirely different story. Start the story with the failure of the African state and not with the colonial creation of the African state, and you have an entirely different story. I recently spoke at a university where a student told me that it was such a shame that Nigerian men were physical abusers like the father character in my novel. I told him that I had just read a novel called American Psycho, and, and that it was such a shame that young Americans were serial murderers. Now, 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 obviously, I said this in a fit of mild irritation, but it would never have occurred to me to think that just because I had read a novel in which a character was a serial killer, that he was somehow representative of all Americans. And now, this is not because I'm a better person than that student, but because of America's cultural and economic power, I had many stories of America. I had read Tyler, Updike, and Steinbeck, and Gateskill. I did not have a single story of America. When I learned some years ago that writers were expected to have had really unhappy childhoods to be successful, I began to think about how I could invent horrible things my parents had done to me. But the truth is that I had a very happy childhood, full of laughter and love in a very close-knit family. But I also had grandfathers who died in refugee camps. My cousin, Polly, died because he could not get adequate health care. One of my closest friends, Okoloma, died in a plane crash because our fire trucks did not have water. I grew up under repressive military governments that devalued education so that sometimes my parents were not paid their salaries. And so as a child, I saw jam disappear from the breakfast table. Then margarine disappeared. Then bread became too expensive. Then milk became rationed. And most of all, a kind of normalized political fear invaded our lives. All of these stories make me who I am. But to insist on only these negative stories is to flatten my experience and to overlook the many other stories that formed me. The single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. Of course, Africa is a continent full of catastrophes. The immense ones, such as the horrific rapes in Congo, and depressing ones, such as the fact that 5,000 people apply for one job vacancy in Nigeria. But there are other stories that are not about catastrophe. And it is very important, it is just as important to talk about them. I've always felt that it is impossible to engage properly with a place or a person without engaging with all of the stories of that place and that person. The consequence of the single story is this: it robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar. So, what if before my Mexican trip, I had followed the immigration debate from both sides, the US and the Mexican? What if my mother had told us that Fide's family was poor and hardworking? What if we had an African television network that broadcast diverse African stories all over the world? What the Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe calls a balance of stories. What if my roommate knew about my Nigerian publisher, Mukhtar Bakare, a remarkable man who left his job in a bank to follow his dream and start a publishing house? Now, the conventional wisdom was that Nigerians don't read literature. He disagreed. He felt that people who could read would read if you made literature affordable and available to them. Shortly after he published my first novel, I went to a TV station in Lagos to do an interview. And a woman who worked there as a messenger came up to me and said, I really liked your novel. I didn't like the ending. Now you must write a sequel, and this is what will happen. And she went on to tell me what to write in the sequel. Now, I was not only charmed, I was very moved. Here was a woman, part of the ordinary masses of Nigerians who were not supposed to be readers. She had not only read the book, but she had taken ownership of it and felt justified in telling me what to write in the sequel. Now, what if my roommate knew about my friend, Fumi Yonda, a fearless woman who hosts a TV show in Lagos and is determined to tell the stories that we prefer to forget? What if my roommate knew about the heart procedure that was performed in the Lagos hospital last week? What if my roommate knew about contemporary Nigerian music? Talented people singing in English and Pidgin and Igbo and Yoruba and Ijo, mixing influences from Jay-Z to Fela to Bob Marley to their grandfathers. What if my roommate knew about the female lawyer who recently went to court in Nigeria to challenge a ridiculous law that required women to get their husband's consent before renewing their passports? What if my roommate knew about Nollywood, full of innovative people making films despite great technical odds? Films so popular that they really are the best example of Nigerians consuming what they produce. What if my roommate knew about my wonderfully ambitious hair braider who has just started her own business selling hair extensions? Or about the millions of other Nigerians who start businesses and sometimes fail, but continue to nurse ambition? Every time I am home, I'm confronted with the usual sources of irritation for most Nigerians: our failed infrastructure, our failed government, but also by the incredible resilience of people who thrive despite the government rather than because of it. I teach writing workshops in Lagos every summer, and it is amazing to me how many people apply, how many people are eager to write, to tell stories. My Nigerian publisher and I have just started a nonprofit called Farafina Trust, and we have big dreams of building libraries and refurbishing libraries that already exist and providing books for state schools that don't have anything in their libraries, and also of organizing lots and lots of workshops on reading and writing for all the people who are eager to tell our many stories. Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. The American writer Alice Walker wrote this about her southern relatives who had moved to the north, and she introduced them to a book about the southern life that they had left behind. They sat around reading the book themselves, listening to me read the book, and the kind of paradise was regained. I would like to end with this thought that when we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place, we regain a kind of paradise. Thank you.
Okay. So I want you to think about the danger of the single story. And I would like you to take out your phone, a piece of paper, wherever you want to write it. It's not something that you're necessarily going to share with me just yet, but we are going to look at it tomorrow. Um, what is your story that is not a single story? I have had students tell me in the past about bullying, um, about maybe an unhappy situation at home. I had one student at 19 who told me that being a breast cancer survivor was not her single story. Then I want you to write down how you project single stories on others, and we can all think of an incident. at least one, right? Where we judge someone based on what they look like, based on what they smelled like, based on how they spoke, based on a feeling we got when they passed by. How did we project that single story? Maybe a group of people that you were with in high school that you had a single story about. And then how do our emotions shift when we realize the danger of that single story? So take a few minutes, think about those three questions, jot down some notes. Miss Sanders, at this point, pause for about 5 or 6 minutes and then return to me um, afterwards. And we have just a few more slides to go, and then you have some work to do. So, using what you know so far about what we've discussed about culture and the single story, I also want you to take a listen to this term. It's called intersectionality. Intersectionality means you are not just in one group, right? I am not simply white. I am also a woman. I am also cisgender. I am also a mom. I am also a teacher. I intersect in various areas of my life, and it causes me to have relationships with different people, experience different things because I'm not just one thing. So, and that term again is intersectionality. And I want to talk to you today about a concept, windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. So, stories as windows. A window is something you can see the world through, and the text we put in front of our students should share this quality. When it comes to reading, we have all heard the narrative that books transport readers to different realms and allow us to escape. Or books give us a way to experience another culture or live the life of a person who may be different from us or who may have come along before us. While this all seems harmless, one can argue that these thoughts are insensitive and lack critical awareness. When we teach students this, we give students the impression that cultures and places in the world require escape, that they are different in a bad way, and that this can perpetuate ideas of xenophobia and assimilation. Instead, what if we were to use windows to learn history, authentic perspectives, and perhaps shared experiences? What if these windows could help us be better global citizens and teach us ways to navigate honor, culture, and make pro social choices? So, I want you to think about the books that were in your classrooms as you were going through school, the history that you learned. If you took a sociology course, maybe even a language course. And the questions are geared, yes, if you were a teacher, but you can transpose the word student into coworker, friend, classmates. Who are my classmates, for example? What are their interests? What do my classmates find curious? What world knowledge can we build together? What connections to prior knowledge can we make? Through what ways can I learn different things about my classmates? And I want you to kind of keep things in mind as we go forward, because Wednesday I'm going to start talking to you about the project that you're going to be starting. So, stories as windows. I can see into other cultures. Stories as mirrors. They allow us to see ourselves. They show us what we look like. They let us examine ourselves. They give us a glimpse of our ancestry and our heritage. Um, what more do I need to know about my classmates? What are their funds of knowledge? How does intersectionality live in our learning spaces? Am I seeing that person as a gay man? Is he more than that? What else is he? How do my classmates see themselves? What activities can I design to help my classmates explore their identities? And I would really say more, instead of activities, that's a teacher thing, I would say attitudes. What attitude can I design in myself to help me, my classmates and myself explore their identity, feel comfortable with me? How can I prepare myself so I can best support my classmates in this process? And then finally, sliding glass doors. The ideas of representation and cultural awareness are central to the concept of windows and mirrors, but critical reflection and thoughtful action are central to the idea of literature as a sliding glass door, a concept similar to windows. But sliding glass doors also represent a change in perspective about the possibilities in a real world that a particular text helps the reader to consider. So, for example, in the book Wonder, a young adult novel about a boy with unsettling facial abnormalities, and wrote in his journal, "Yesterday when I was at the grocery store with my mom," now this is a boy who had read the book, "and I saw a man with no arm. I looked away, and then I thought of Augie." That's the boy in the book. I'm sure so many of you have read the book Wonder. "I looked the man right in the eye and smiled. He smiled back." Through such sliding glass door experiences, changes can happen in the minds and hearts of students, teachers, and thus the world. And I want to just read you a couple of things. Um, Books are sometimes windows offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through in imagination to become part of whatever world has been created or recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of the larger human experience. Reading then becomes a means of self affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books. 6,340,000 non white children are learning to read and to understand the American way of life in books which either omit them entirely or scarcely mention them. A quarter of a century later, census data indicates that 30% of the school population are members of so called minority groups: Latinos, Afro Americans, Asian Americans, Native Americans. And where will these people find their mirrors? Children from dominant social groups always found their mirrors in books, but they too have suffered from the lack of availability of books about others. They need the books as windows onto reality, not just on imaginary worlds. They need books that will help them understand the multicultural nature of the world they live in and their place as a member of just one group, as well as their connections to all other humans. Books can introduce readers into the history and traditions that are important to any one cultural group and which invites comparisons to their own. When you want to learn about something, you have to read about it. When you read about it, you cannot be reading what you already know. It's like talking into a vacuum. Um, and surrounding yourself with like minded individuals is great when you're hanging out in sort of social circles, maybe just having a good time, but it's not expanding your mind and it's not expanding who you are. You're not exercising your muscles on not identifying people as single stories. If I'm Republican and speak to nothing but Democrats, I'm speaking in a vacuum, and vice versa. I want you to take the um, readings from today. I'm skipping a few slides, Miss Sanders. So if you have to use these differently, I'm going to send some notes to you, because I'm running a little long on time and I want them to have time to do this. You're going to break into 3 groups. We're going to do something called jigsawing the readings. If you've never done it before, it's really pretty easy. You're going to separate yourself into 3 groups. Miss Sanders will do it with you. And each of you is going to get one of the 3 readings. You're going to use the 4A's strategy that we talked about yesterday to read. You're going to first read it as a group, and then you're going to talk about it using the 4A's. You're going to do that for the next 30 minutes, then take your 15-minute break, then come back, and for the next 30 minutes, you're going to teach the other 2 groups what it was your article was about and go through the 4A's with them in terms of the article. And then that last 15 minutes, any questions that you have, anything that you want to finish up. I didn't get to everything I wanted, but I'm running low on time and I don't want to not give you time to do this. So one of the groups will do My Tongue is Divided in Two. And if you go back into your email, I have sent you these readings. The other group will do Identification Please. And there, the E is left off on purpose. And then the third group will do Anzaldua, How to Tame a Wild Tongue. Okay, so again, you're going to use those 4A's. I'll also include that in the email just in case you can't find it or don't want to go looking for it. You're going to read it together as a group. Sometimes those things are best done out loud. So if you have like a quiet corner in the room you can go to or outside in the hall and have it read out loud, that often is better than reading it to yourselves. Use the 4A's to analyze your reading. And then after the 15-minute break, come back and teach about your article to the other 2 groups because those other 2 groups won't have read them. And all 3 articles are important to the entire class. So it's really important that you give a good summary, succinct, and you really get into the meat, the 4A's, what you thought about it, what you argued, what you agree with, what you aspired to. And give your classmates your interpretation of what was important about the article. Again, I will enclose all of this in an email with directions as well as all of the links to the articles. And Miss Sanders, I will have them all for you as well, but they're also right on this slide, on the 3 slides. And just to go back briefly, if I will also include this, I wanted to just give you the library resources link. This is for NJCU. So I'm just going to open it up quickly. These are all of the things that the library has available to you. So in terms of that pre-assessment writing that's due Wednesday at 5, please take advantage of going to the library and using those. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. I'm going to convert the video so that I can post it on YouTube and Miss Sanders can share it with you tomorrow. It's 30 minutes for the reading, 15-minute break, 30 minutes for the jigsawing to talk about the reading with the other 2 groups. And then any questions that you have, submit them to me. If it can wait until tomorrow, great. If Miss Sanders can help you, I'm sure she will. Have a wonderful rest of the class. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'm really looking forward to meeting you all in person tomorrow. Bye.